By the end of 1998, World Championship Wrestling was losing in ratings to its competitor, the World Wrestling Federation, week in and week out. The company had been circling the drain, and its demise was all but inevitable. Creative blunders, petty backstage politics among its performers, and the company's inability to come up with any major and meaningful storylines outside of the New World Order led to it finally being put out of its misery a few short years later, in early 2001, just as WCW's television product was losing traction against the WWF during the Monday Night Wars. So too were their video game offerings. WCW nWo Revenge, developed by the Aki Corporation and released in October of 1998 exclusively for the Nintendo 64, was the last great WCW game to come out before the company folded. All of their games afterwards took a nosedive in terms of quality. For those wrestling fans lucky enough to own an N64, Revenge and its predecessor, World Tour, were the kings of the mountain. Their simple yet satisfying grappling systems made them easy to pick up and play. The spirit meters implemented during matches that ensured constant back-and-forth momentum made them feel like a genuine recreation of the matches in real life. Their gameplay was as perfect and crisp as could be. Heartbreakingly, though, for PlayStation fans, they would be given the short end of the stick with two other WCW games, abhorrent companion pieces that came out at the tail end of the millennium, published by THQ. The games were WCW Nitro in early 1998 and WCW nWo Thunder in early 99. For PS1 users, these games were the first to provide a truly authentic WCW experience on the console. I don't count WCW vs. the World because it was just a North American localization of a Japanese wrestling game. It had very limited WCW representation and wasn't built from the ground up with the promotion in mind. Developed by the short-lived Inland Productions that nobody remembers outside of these two games, Nitro and Thunder get put through the ringer online by virtually everyone. They are frequently listed as two of the worst wrestling games ever made, and it's almost impossible to talk about them without making comparisons to WCW's far better offerings on the N64. But I don't want to just jump on the bandwagon with my video and attack them non-stop like 99.9% of the internet seems to do. These games are terrible, and I will be going into their various issues, but while few in number and not all that significant, there are some redeeming aspects I enjoy about them too. Dare I say, they can be kind of fun. Is that the word I'm looking for? Probably not. Too strong. Right out of the gate, I want to discuss their graphics and presentation. Just as a disclaimer, for anyone out there who has not played them before, this footage has not been sped up. This is just how fast Nitro and Thunder play. Their action goes a mile a minute. After playing them for several hours, the rest of existence will feel like slow motion. Anyways, a lot of people say they look like shit because of their overall attitudes towards these titles, but honestly, I don't think they're half bad when you look at some other sports games that came out around this time. Keep in mind, if their gameplay had been solid, I don't think the graphics in Nitro and Thunder would have really mattered at the end of the day, because we'd still be playing them, we'd still be talking about them fondly and enjoying them regardless of their visuals, as is the case with a lot of retro games. Most of the wrestler models look acceptable, outside of Lex Luger's and Scott Hall's, that have this wrinkly texture on their backs that make them look like aliens wearing human skin. The character models in Nitro and Thunder use a similar seamless skin technology with digitized images of the wrestlers that WWF Warzone would use when it was released in mid-1998. Here, it doesn't look as good, but then again, the wrestlers are also much smaller in scale than in Warzone. The arenas in Nitro and Thunder look really good, probably the strongest aspect these games have going for them. They are all vibrant and colorful, distinct from one another, and effectively emulate the look and feel of WCW's presentation at the time. The crowds are given some animation, you'll hear fans yell out things towards particular wrestlers, and in Thunder, they will even toss garbage into the ring if the heel wrestler wins, or is getting the upper hand in a match, a frequent visual you would see on WCW programming. Whether you are in a television arena or in any of the pay-per-view ones, none of them are visually accurate based on any specific incarnation of an event, but are instead a hodgepodge of the developer's own ideas of what the shows could look like. Honestly, this makes them even more interesting and memorable, in my opinion, than if they were to just have recreated ones. Nitro and Thunder both feature arenas for Slamboree, Sold Out, Fall Brawl, The Great American Bash, and Halloween Havoc, but being the sequel, Thunder's pay-per-view selection is larger, incorporating Starrcade, Bash at the Beach, Super Brawl, Uncensored, World War III, and Road Wild. Each game has exclusive arenas too. Nitro obviously has the one for Monday Nitro, but it also has branded arenas for WCW and the nWo, sort of like World Tour did on the N64. Thunder has two different arenas for Thursday Thunder, the original Rocky one that was first introduced, as well as its updated redesign shortly after. Choosing arenas in these games is a pain in the ass because you have to go to the options menu to do it. It's set to random by default. The load times are virtually non-existent between menus, so it's not as brutal as it could be, but still, you shouldn't have to do this before every match if you want to fight in a particular arena. There's a bit of commentary in these games provided by Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan. It gets a bit humorous and repetitive at times, but hey, at least it's here. Before I get into the gameplay of Nitro and Thunder, I want to first mention the rosters and match types in both the games. WCW didn't know how to effectively utilize most of their talent, but they did have one of the greatest rosters in professional wrestling history in the late 90s, with their mid-carders and cruiserweights, more often than not, stealing the show from the main eventers. Thunder greatly expanded its roster to accommodate the vast amount of tag teams and factions present in WCW at the time. Honestly, its selection is pretty overwhelming once you have everyone unlocked. It has WCW's entire talent pool they had on TV basically, from the main eventers all the way down to the absolute bottom of the barrel, even people that didn't even compete in the ring, like managers and the Nitro girls. The game also added in the ability to assign each wrestler to one of 5 stables: WCW, nWo Hollywood, nWo Wolfpack, Raven's Flock, or the Four Horsemen. There's also the option to edit the might of a wrestler using the shoulder buttons on the selection screen. It increases or decreases the amount of damage they inflict and can receive with each of their body parts. Quite frankly, I don't even think it's noticeable in matches. It did nothing to change the gameplay. It's a useless feature. Something that is brought up by everyone who has played these games, though, are the rants from the wrestlers, which you can activate by hitting circle when you hover over them. They are essentially pre-match promos that have been recorded by them, taunting their opponents or explaining why you should choose to play as them over anyone else. Some of them are really genuine, authentic feeling, with the performers giving 110%, whereas others can be awkward to sit through and are just downright lame. Either they weren't given the right direction behind the scenes, or they didn't care about the extra work they would have been forced to do for a video game. They remind me of the grudge match promos in WWF Warzone. Some of them suffer from the same issues, but a few can be really entertaining.
Hey, Funky Boy, like there's a choice here? Good God! Pick the man with the plan. Pick deep,
Moving on to the match types and modes in these games, Nitro is definitely the more limited of the two. All you have are standard singles matches and tag team matches, as well as a tournament mode, which is just a series of 10 one-on-one matches in a row to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. In Nitro, the game doesn't track the victor in any way, but in Thunder, it provided 3 separate ladders you could climb for the Heavyweight, United States, and Television Gold, and the winners of each would have a little title belt in the corner of their selection boxes on the roster screen. Thunder brought in some additional match types as well, like the 30-man Battle Royal. You have to throw your opponents over the top rope to eliminate them. The bump they take is hugely exaggerated. I want to say this match is fun, but it becomes boring and monotonous really fast. The game has to load between entrants, a common issue with these PS1 wrestling titles. And because so many wrestlers are in the ring at once, the game lags pretty bad, making the gameplay even more difficult, which I will get into in a second. Thunder was the first and only WCW game that allowed you to play a giant over-the-top rope battle royal like this at the World War III arena, though the match they had at the event had 60 wrestlers and not just 30. Another new match type Thunder brings to the table are cage matches. You don't really interact with the cage all that much, apart from climbing halfway up it to jump off, or by tossing your opponent into it with a ring-out move, but at least the rules of the match are accurate. You win by pinfall or submission, and not by the stupid climbing out to safety stipulation. That defeats the entire purpose of the gimmick. It's weird that the arena is darkly lit with these matches though. There are no fans, as if the game could only render them or the cage, and not both. WCW nWo Thunder was also the first and only WCW game to have a cage match in it, which is another crazy bit of trivia. Unlike Nitro, Thunder would add weapons to its matches as well, which can be found outside the ring. You pick them up by simply walking over them, and using them does not result in disqualification. You set the amount of weapons that can be found in matches from few to some or to many in the options menu. You can't turn them off completely, and when you do choose to have the most weapons at ringside, expect the game to lag from that a little bit too, especially in tag matches. If not for the delayed button inputs, I'd say this is the way to play Thunder. The lag makes it run at a normal fucking speed. Because Thunder has the larger roster, a few more match types and arenas, you'd think I would consider it the stronger game of the two, but I don't, for reasons I will finally address. The gameplay in both Nitro and Thunder leaves a lot to be desired, which you could probably already tell after watching this footage. Just like WWF Warzone and Attitude I looked at a few months ago, they are nowhere near unplayable if you actually take the time to sit down and learn their controls like I did, but they are definitely not as accessible as many other titles in the wrestling game genre. Nitro and Thunder have you input specific button combinations to perform moves. The movesets of every wrestler are identical except for 1, 2, or 3 signature and finishing moves, unique only to them, depending on who you choose to play as. Signature moves can be performed at any point throughout a match, whereas finishing moves can only be done when your opponent's health is at red, critical. Some of the animations are spot on, like DDP's Diamond Cutter, whereas others are completely wrong, like Kevin Nash having a sit-down powerbomb in place of his jackknife. The universal moves aren't that complicated to get down if, again, you take the time to master them. A lot of them use similar buttons in their sequences and have different tiers to their difficulty, so to speak. For example, pressing back then triangle does a vertical suplex, up triangle does a body slam, and down triangle does an abdominal stretch. The moves assigned to square include a hip toss, which is back square, and a snapmare, which is up square. Other moves like a pile driver, triangle circle, belly-to-belly suplex, triangle square, powerbomb, square X, and backbreaker, down square triangle use a combination of multiple face buttons. Irish whips are performed by pressing back circle, and to throw your opponent out of the ring with either an overhead toss or an Irish whip through the ropes is done by pressing back X and then circle. Tossing your opponent outside the ring is useful to create distance between you and your opponent so you can taunt and regain some of your health. I know all of this sounds very confusing when verbalized, but after you play enough matches and practice, the controls in Nitro and Thunder aren't as bad as a lot of people make them out to be. The universal movesets make everything really simple, or at least as simple as they can be given the circumstances. The only moves that will give you any trouble are of course the signatures and finishers, just because they are a bit more intricate with their button presses. You'll probably have to look those up prior to playing. Comparing Nitro and Thunder to the Acclaim wrestling games on the PS1, I actually find them to be a little less complicated and, dare I say, more enjoyable, especially in the case of Warzone, Acclaim's first 3D title. There are more universal moves shared by the entire roster in Nitro and Thunder, and the button sequences for the signature and finishing moves for wrestlers in both games carry over, so you don't have to learn them all from scratch moving from game to game. Another big thing is the fact that the matches in Nitro and Thunder only last between 1 to 5 minutes on average, depending on which difficulty you are playing on. I find in Thunder, wrestlers will kick out of pins more often, even after multiple finishers. The matches in the Acclaim games became far too long with the limited movesets they had. Warzone was excruciating, grindingly slow with those countless stun meters. Nitro and Thunder have limited movesets also, but at least you can play several matches in the time it takes you to beat just one in the Acclaim games, and seeing different special moves from each of the wrestlers, along with new arenas, definitely helps. Playing on hard difficulty gives your opponent a higher chance to hit their signatures and finishers as well, so there can be a tense back and forth between you and the AI. The cadence of the button presses in Nitro and Thunder are much faster than in the Acclaim games though. They can be more unforgiving with how accurate they want you to be with them, and when looking at Thunder, it does throw a wrench into everything a bit by having the vertical suplex, powerbomb, and piledriver stuck behind a tie-up button first, which was unnecessary. The reason I find Thunder to be the weaker game of the two, despite its additional features and wrestlers, is the stupid test of strength minigame Inland Productions implemented in its matches. You can be put into it by complete accident numerous times when fucking up a button press, and during this lock-up state, mashing buttons can completely drain your opponent's health and increase yours to max. Afterwards, you can hit a finisher and win within seconds if you want to. It's terribly designed and downright breaks the game. To really enjoy Thunder, and I do use that term lightly, you need to be able to ignore this annoying mechanic because it makes the game way too easy regardless of the difficulty you set it to. But that's easier said than done as you are constantly having to navigate around it throughout matches. The only purpose it does serve is if you are getting your ass kicked, you can cheese it a tiny bit to get back some health and keep your match going, making the battles slightly more epic. Slightly. Throughout this review, I have been grasping at straws when it comes to the positive elements of these games though. What I find really frustrating about Nitro and Thunder, even after all these years, is the fact that they could have been great, or at least halfway decent, even if their visuals were their weakest aspect. All of that could have been forgiven if the gameplay had been solid, easy to pick up and play, if Inland Productions had taken more time to polish everything, slowed the action down significantly, and simplified the controls. A lot more people would be willing to revisit these games today, and we'd have countless retrospections online labeling them as underrated or hidden gems. I have not brought up all of the goofy content both Nitro and Thunder have in them through cheat codes, because I completely disregard it mentally. All of the silly wrestlers and arenas the developers stuck in, it's insane, bizarre, extremely rudimentary level humor that only the youngest of kids would enjoy, the ones that would find these games too complicated to even play in the first place. After the initial shock value is gone, all of it loses its novelty within seconds. I am puzzled at the mindset of the development team here, how they thought any of this would be fun to play for extended periods of time. The team at Inland Productions even programmed themselves into the games as playable wrestlers. Why would anyone outside of the developers want to play as them though? No offense. All of this time spent programming this absurd content could have gone into making a better wrestling game, fixed a lot of the other technical issues and problems with the gameplay and controls themselves. It makes me wonder if the developers even cared about the final product, if they took the project and the WCW name seriously. Clearly they didn't, with how much of an emphasis was put on the stupid nonsensical shit. I hadn't played Nitro and Thunder in many years, since I was a child basically. I was expecting them to be absolute garbage. I remember them being garbage, but outside of the trashy bonus content you can unlock after revisiting them and taking the time to learn their controls, I actually found myself having some level of fun. They're really fast-paced and arcade-like in execution. I was laughing at a lot of their glaring issues, but was also somewhat impressed with their animations and overall presentation and atmosphere. I enjoyed them a lot more than I thought I was going to, doing this retrospective on them. I'm not trying to defend them. They are very shitty among many other pro wrestling video games, but in a way, I'm glad Nitro and Thunder still exist, because they are unique, intriguing, and are definitely playable when in the right frame of mind. I didn't expect this video to be that long. I thought it was just going to be a quick verbal dump on these games and then I'd move on to something else. But I hope those of you watching enjoyed yourselves and got something out of this in some way. I'm having a lot of fun with these wrestling game retrospectives. I don't care how many views they've been getting, how much support. It's been a blast reliving these memories. I love wrestling, always have and always will, and I hope to see more of you when I continue this series in a few months' time. If you'd like to show your support to the channel and ensure the creation of more videos like this, you can do so by subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, and by becoming a producer over on patreon.com/channel NerdGasm. I will see you all in the next one. Take care and stay nerdy.